All right, it's time for Yogi and the BEACHMAN. Hi, I'm Jim the Yogi.
And I'm Rick Beach, the BEACHMAN.
We're two Michigan transplants now living in Southwest Florida.
In fact, we're cousins born in 1964, just a month apart.
I like to meditate.
And I like to play bass in a band.
I'm into chanting Om.
And I'm into throwing down some classic rock.
But together, we're on a mission
to promote people that are helping other people.
We want to make the world a better place.
One conversation at a time.
So sit back,
turn up the volume,
and get ready to laugh.
Because we like to have fun
while we spread the love.
Interviewing lovely people. Yes, we have fun.
We just kind of see where it goes.
Okay, that's great.
And we're kind of both, you know, Jim's a nurse. I'm a solar salesman and musician. And so we have different backgrounds. We're cousins a month apart. And we just love talking to people like you. And it's like it said, it's more of a conversation.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah, I watched one episode earlier while I was driving around running some errands. So I got kind of a feel for, you know, your interview style, and very casual. So I was like, all right, cool.
Which one did you watch?
It was the one with the Reiki lady.
Oh, Mary Ivy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was somebody you were connected to, Jim, right?
Yes. Oh, very cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Let's rock and roll.
She's wonderful. All right. Welcome back to Yogi and the BEACHMAN. Today we are with William Brown, Brother Bear, Koroskenyi. So welcome to the show. Would you like us to call you Brother Bear?
Oh, you can call me Brother Bear. You can call me Brown.
I like call me either, Bear, but whatever. So I'm Jim the Yogi.
I'm Rick Beach, the BEACHMAN.
Hey, guys.
Hey, we're excited to have you on the show today.
Thanks.
So you're a medicine man?
Yes, sir.
All right. And, well, you consider yourself a modern medicine man, spiritual entrepreneur, and a visionary founder behind Avatar, I can't talk today, Apocryphy, and the Avatar Center.
Apothecary.
Thank you. Sacred platforms devoted to earth-based healing, personal transformation, and soul remembrance. Sounds like you're doing beautiful work. Tell us about yourself.
Oh, geez, where to start is the question, right? Do we start from here? Do we start at the beginning?
You start in the womb, or
right, exactly, or prior to that.
Well, how about we start with defining some of these terms that I'm not familiar with?
Okay.
Spiritual entrepreneur.
Okay, what does that mean? Basically, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a business owner. I have been self-employed. I'm 44 years old now. I've been self-employed since I was 29, and so that's been a journey. Starting and for me, it was also a very spiritual experience, leaving behind the world of the job, right? Mm-hmm. Which for me was a positive training ground, but also continuously presented these kinds of caps or limits on my own potential within that container. So for me, embarking on the journey of entrepreneurship was really that next level of embodiment of my own spiritual journey, because it meant that I was taking risks. I was stepping into the unknown in effort to realize the full expression of my being, whatever that was going to result as. Right, I had a bigger vision than could be contained within any of the jobs that I had previously. I was a baker, I was a landscaper, I was a farm manager, I was a house painter. I, did sound healing at nursing homes and for yoga classes. I was a community gardener. I did so many different things, and I found myself, looking at all these different things I had done and starting to feel a little bit like I was also a musician for many years, still am, but in a band, touring and traveling and recording. But I was starting to feel a little bit like the jack of all trades, master of none, and I really wanted to. There was another part of my being that was just yearning to be implemented and breathed into this world, and that was the start of my journey. There with entrepreneurship was also my start of my or not the start of my spiritual journey, but really it was a big leap.
All right. Well, so where did that journey take you? Oh, and I just want to say, I don't know if you've heard this before, but a lot of times we call that JOB, just above broke.
Sure. Oh yeah. And I was just above or just below at different times, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you got into entrepreneurship, left the job, and where did your path go?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, the first thing I did was I got involved in a network marketing opportunity, working with a nutritional product, which at that time was the company's not around anymore, but was a like a superfood product, and I had been healing myself for 2 years prior on the raw food diet. I,
Hmm.
growing up, had a lot of digestive problems, had migraine headaches, a lot of different health related issues, in addition to anxiety and depression and all kinds of other issues. And I had come upon in my journey, because early on, I had, with those issues, the doctor was recommending or was giving me medications. And
Hmm.
so even as a young person, even as an early teenager, recognized that that wasn't the solution.
Yeah.
Even though others in my family, they weren't really on that path. They didn't really understand that fully. Maybe they did on some level, but on another level, no. And so for me, I took them a couple of times and I was like, nope, this is it. I'd rather suffer until I find my own solution that resonates with me. And so that led me down a path. And surely that did mean more suffering in the process.
Hmm.
But it led me on a path to learning about real food, about whole foods, about plants, and all these phytonutrients, and also about grounding and all of these different aspects, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, I had already learned a lot about nutrition. I had learned a lot about the energy in food and its impact on our living food on our health. And a girlfriend at that time was doing the raw foods diet, and she was like, "Man, I feel so much energy. Everything's raw, it's mostly smoothies, right from the garden into the blender and into the dehydrator, and nothing processed that isn't made in the kitchen." And so I went and I started it, and I did it for 18 months and healed so many different issues in my body. My skin was better, my energy level was better, my headaches went away, my digestive problems went away. So when that product came into my life, and it had reishi mushroom and sea buckthorn and acai and all these amazing superfoods, I had already learned about these things, knew the power of them, and I think a third of the ingredients were from the Amazon. And I
Hmm.
had many years prior, when I was 21, had an experience in the Amazon where that changed my life. And so for me, that many of these ingredients were coming from the jungle, of Peru and Brazil. I felt already the strong connection, and so I felt interested in getting involved, and that was my first venture out of the job.
All right. Can you share that experience you had in the Amazon that changed your life?
Yeah, man. Like, I was 21 years old, and I had been planning a trip with my dad to go to India. And it would have been, he'd spent years traveling the world and, for business. And I always kind of, had this underlying maybe sense of, sadness or something that I didn't get to go on these adventures to Asia with him, right? As I was
Hmm.
growing up. And so at that time, I was, I think 20 when we started talking about going to India. And, and so I was getting really excited, and we spent a year planning this trip. And then Pakistan sends, missiles over into the Indian desert. And we were going to be our plan was to go to Rajasthan and ride camels and so we were like, maybe we need to rethink this at this time. And there was a woman in my life. I worked on a farm, and she's she was going to Lima, Peru, the capital of Peru, to volunteer, and she invited me to. She said, "Oh, you already have the time off work. You've got the money saved. Tickets are really cheap. Come to Peru, and we can do a little traveling together, and then you can keep going on your journey for as long as you want." And I was like, "Okay, great," and hopped on an airplane. Pretty much with no preparation. I didn't really know anything about Peru at the time. Went to the bookstore, Barnes and Noble, picked up a little plug for Barnes and Noble there. Picked up a Lonely Planet Guide to Peru, and got there. And pretty much, it was a spiritual journey, man. Like from the moment landing in Lima, having never gone on a big journey like that by myself, internationally. That was a big deal. But then every step of that journey, I didn't really have a clear direction of where I was going. I just felt it out. And so I would just open the book kind of randomly and pick a place, and then I would go there. And then I would find my way to a park, and I would just sit there and I would meditate. And I would wait until kind of somebody who vibrationally, where I felt that resonance came by, and I would start talking to them. And then they would lead me somewhere, and they would introduce me to someone. And, I spent 4 months total traveling in Peru, only a week and a half with that friend that I mentioned. And near the end of that journey, about 3 months in, I made my way to the Amazon. And it was really, for me, it was magical. And like I can, the hairs are standing up on my arm, just, remembering, coming out of the cloud forest and down into the Amazon. And there was this moment where this little bus, it was kind of a van, slowed down, and we were coming around the bend where the mountains come down into the valley, and there was this beautiful flower, to the left of the bus, and I just had my head pressed up against the window. We've been in the bus for 4 hours, and this butterfly comes over with exactly matching colors, and it was like it landed on the flower and just disappeared, like it just assimilated. It became one. Its pattern completely matched the flower to where I could not tell the difference between what was the butterfly and what was the flower. And tears just rushed down my face. And for me, it was like an encounter with God, in that moment. And so that energy from that moment I got into the Amazon was just really magical. And I took a 3-4 day boat ride up the Amazon River to the city of Iquitos. And again, I just went, and I let my intuition guide me and synchronicity guide me, and found myself at a location where I was on a boardwalk, and I was overlooking the Amazon River. And I had this moment where it was almost like I entered into like some kind of an altered state, just looking at the forest, and all the hairs rose on my arms, and tears just started rushing down my face. And there was this transmission, like, was it a voice? Was it a telepathy? It was a transmission. These are the types of things you can't really, you never really
They
know.
just happen.
They
Yeah.
just happen, exactly. Very difficult to describe. And the message was, a part of your soul was welcome home. A part of your soul has been here for thousands of years.
Wow.
And that was the message. And it was just like this feeling, and all these memories of all these times in my life from early childhood where I felt out of place, where I felt like I hadn't found my people, where I hadn't found my true home, where I felt like I was born into the wrong family in the wrong time. All of that kind of flashed before my eyes, and everything just kind of melted away, and it all felt whole all of a sudden, just being there in the presence of the jungle.
This sounds like a
Yeah.
Celestine prophecy book. This is pretty cool.
you know it's a real story.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in the end I ended up going out and spending about what was it, it was close to 4 weeks trekking in the forest with a guide. I hired a guide and he took me out, and he had lived in the deep jungle in these small villages for many years, for most of his life. He was about 50 at that time. And this guy was such an inspiration. He was so connected to the land.
Mhm.
I was just struck. I always had a really close relationship with nature. For me, I always, have said that, that the when I'm in nature, it's like all aspects of myself are suddenly welcome. Whereas, we all have these different parts of ourselves in certain situations. We feel like, oh, we've got to kind of hide that part away, right?
Mhm.
Where these other masks, right? In this scenario. And in the force, I just always felt like all aspects of myself were completely welcome. And in the end of that journey in the jungle, it was magical, man. We slept in hammocks in the deep forest, waded through swamps. It was the rainy season. Had a close encounter with an anaconda. We slept on the floor of these little huts in these tiny little villages of 10 families, hunted and fished with the people and bathed in the river with them. And in the end of that journey, the guide had met a curandera, female shaman in the neighboring village, and she had walked up to him, and she said, "You're with a gringo," and he said, "Yeah." And she said, and she described me with long hair. I was wearing a bandana on my head, and a young man, a hoven. And she said, he's meant to come to ceremony with me
Wow.
tomorrow night. And he said, okay, and she described where she lives and what time the
Mhm.
ceremony was going to start. And he comes back to the village later around sunset and he tells me, and he said, it's an ayahuasca ceremony. And I said, what's ayahuasca? I had no idea what
No
ayahuasca
idea, huh?
was. No idea. I never heard it. I mean, this is what 2001 wasn't on my radar at the time, and and so I closed my eyes and I tuned in, and the answer was yes, and I went, and
Mhm.
that ceremony, you know, just me and my guide and this female shaman on a dirt floor in the middle of the jungle.
Just the
Um,
three of you
just the
doing
three of
ayahuasca.
us. Yeah, it
Interesting.
was just
Okay.
actually me and her drinking, and
Oh,
he just sat and held space and tended the fire.
okay.
And no mosquito nets, no, there was a trench carved in the floor for purging, and honestly, like that ceremony was was incredible. It was life changing for me.
Tell us about it.
So how many doses did you do? Because they say the first one is not the pleasant one.
Not the pleasant way. I, at that particular night, I only drank 1 cup. It was plenty. It was plenty. And I want to say also that because I'd been in the jungle for so long, and at that time I was a vegetarian, and if you're trying to survive in the jungle as a vegetarian, you're going to basically be fasting most of the time. So I had been, doing a lot of physical activity, walking, 3, 4, 5 hours a day in the jungle and eating very little. So I think that 1 cup was more than enough.
And what did you experience?
um, well, it was kind of interesting because in the first, maybe even, I mean, it's difficult to tell time when you start working with ayahuasca. That
Hmm.
first period of time, like before the medicine kicks in, it's difficult to say whether it's 20 minutes or it's 2 hours, right? For me, it
Yeah.
felt like it was 2 hours, where I was just sitting there, meditating in silence with my eyes closed. It felt like a really long time. And I started to think,
Hmm.
I don't think anything's going to happen. That was the feeling. And
Yeah.
then she started to sing. And then once she started to sing, it was just like the medicine, it was like the Buddha, it was just booting up. It was like "Brr, brr, 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 brr," and just like the visions came over me. It was like the sensations in my body changed, and it was like a very quickly, um, my perception of myself really changed. And I think it was so special that it was really just just me and her that night, and the sounds of the jungle. Listening to the birds and the monkeys and the crickets and the frogs. They were such an active part of that experience. It was like I'd become one or merged with the consciousness of the forest. I was seeing these indigenous ceremonies, these indigenous shamans. I had an experience where I was soaring on the back of an eagle over the forest. And one moment I remember, feeling an incredible, grief and sadness, like the pain of the earth at the hands of human beings. And I remember weeping and just feeling it. And I remember her, asking me if she wanted me to bring it down. And I said, no, this is important for me to feel, you know? And so I kept going. And then I remember this experience where this snake, there was this kind of a dark vision of, like, it was at night, looking over a swamp, and a black snake came up out of the water. And we just locked eyes. And there was this feeling and this thought, right? More of this thought that was, shouldn't I be afraid right now? Like, shouldn't I be? And
Yeah.
but I wasn't. And what happened then was the snake jumped up, and it went in my mouth, and it went down my esophagus, and it got intertwined in my intestines. Yeah.
Wow.
And I felt it there. And then all of a sudden, like a few moments later, it purged, and it all came out. And it was like it went in and like magnetized, kind of like zeolite, like, like draws in heavy metals, you know what I mean? Like it just collected all of these, kind of dark energies and these blocks and these limiting patterns and beliefs, and just allowed me to liberate myself of them. It was really quite special.
Yeah, and you're 21 years old. I can imagine this had a huge transformation on your life.
Huge, like really, quite significant. I had many experiences with psychedelics at that time, so I wasn't new to that experience, but there was something very different about ayahuasca. And at the same time, there was something about ayahuasca that felt incredibly familiar to me. And it wasn't familiar to me because of the previous experiences I had had earlier on, many years prior with LSD or with mushrooms. It was something that felt, in alignment with that message when I stood at the forefront of the jungle there.
Sure.
It felt older than this life.
Yeah. What size doses were you used to doing with psilocybin mushrooms?
I mean, back in the day at that time, I don't think I was measuring at all.
Are you doing mega doses or
You
microdosing?
Probably anywhere from, on average 3 to 5
Okay.
was probably most,
Yeah.
most of those doses.
Yeah.
Alone in the forest when I was 17, 18. And most of my experiences with the psychedelics and with the visionary medicines earlier on, when I was kind of in that experimental stage, I wasn't the kind of guy that wanted to, take psychedelics and go to a festival or go to a party. I had like one experience like that, and I was like, yeah, never again. And alone in the forest was always my way, because it really helped me to develop a really intimate relationship with the land. That was when I really started to deepen in my understanding of the mysteries of life, right? That that the land and the water holds memory, and that the ancestors of the land are still here now. I had those first encounters, right, with the mushrooms in the forest, and that really fueled my path later on and made a lot more sense later.
Sure. Very cool. And what got you to where you are now? Because you're working with plant-based medicine, I understand.
Yeah.
But you're not talking about marijuana, you're not talking about mushrooms,
No.
you're talking about other medicinal plants.
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a real, I mean, it's a whole journey, right?
Yeah.
Because I started out with, really debilitating depression as a teenager, which led me into, natural medicine and learning about that, and also led me to mushrooms and helped me to basically stop being chronically suicidal. So that was a huge thing. To arrive at that point where I wanted to be more in service, and seeing all of the different ways that when I was struggling in life, that service always led me back to this really deep connection with source, and this really deep connection with a higher calling, right? When I was in service, it was like it caused me to forget the little me, in a sense, the part of myself that was stuck in all these limited identities. And then that journey into natural medicines, and then that experience with ayahuasca, connecting me to the land, and really showing me how interconnected I personally was with the plants and with the spirit of the jungle. And at the end of that experience, on my last days, I ended up going to the beach after leaving the jungle, and having a really I was soul searching at that time, and it really set me up for the rest of my journey. And I was soul searching because I felt so comfortable in the jungle, like even in the deep bush, sleeping in a hammock, even with all the mosquitoes and all the adversity and the heavy rains and everything. I was like, should I just leave everything behind? I was only 21. I didn't have that much going for me, and just move off into the forest. And honestly, it felt like the move to make. But I went to and I sat on the beach, and I ended up doing a vision quest. I didn't even know what a vision quest was at that time. And what happened is I ended up just sitting down, and I had water, and I didn't get a hotel, I didn't get a hostel or a campground, and I just sat on the beach, and there was a bench there, and I watched the sun come up and the sun go down 3 days, drinking nothing but water.
Wow.
And minimal water, because I only had one jug of water, and I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay there. And the reason was, like, I knew that there was something. I was like, do I go home or do I go back to the jungle? And
Sounds like a Clash song.
yeah.
You're familiar with the Clash?
I am, but which song?
Should I stay or should I go?
Oh yeah, of course, exactly. That's what was going on. And it was like I entered into an altered state eventually. And I remember on the third day, and the sun was rising, and in that moment there was like an epiphany. And the epiphany was, you need to go home, because there's something you need to learn. The Amazon is your home, but you can only return once you've learned what you need to learn. It was a bit vague, right? I didn't know what I needed to learn, but that sent me on a journey of 12 years back in the United States, and it really sent me on a journey. I started, and something magical happened when I returned home. I started attracting all of these healers into my life. I started attracting all these people that were on like a shamanic path, all of these seers. And it was just like one person after another, just like, I see you, and it was just this like continual ongoing affirmation in all these different areas. I wasn't like I was just in some spiritual center, I was in central Massachusetts, in a post-industrial town, in the center of cynicism, right? But I was encountering all these beautiful people that were seeing me, and they continued to affirm the parts of myself that I knew about myself, but that I needed to grow into, and also guiding me to those places that those gifts could really be nurtured. I ended up encountering, the many Lakota medicine people over the coming years in both Massachusetts and Ohio, who introduced me to sweat lodges and introduced me to peyote ceremonies. And so I got involved in those communities and I started learning. And then they started inviting me into ceremonies to hold space, to play the medicine drum, to lead a tobacco ceremony, things like that. And so, and for me, I was still young, and I didn't feel like I had really developed in those areas yet. And I was like, "Are you sure you want to trust me?" you know? And they're like, "You can do it, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can play a drum, but I don't know if I could play a drum on peyote like all night long, 12 hours, in a way that's responsible in alignment with your tradition and all these things, right?"
Sure.
And so they were giving me these honor, this honor of holding the space and stepping into more of a community leader kind of position on different levels. And it was on December 12th of 2012, I was in a sweat lodge at the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. I don't know if you know that place. It's a really amazing place, an effigy mound of a giant serpent if you look from an aerial point of view. And it's
Where in Ohio is this?
If I can remember correctly, I want to say it's Peebles, Ohio.
Geographically is like central.
It's like I think it's northeastern Ohio, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Yeah, like I had gone from Pittsburgh, and I think it was maybe like 4 hours.
All right.
And anyway, definitely a place to check out. Really cool. There's a great place down the road, and there's a Lakota medicine woman that lives right down the street, and she's one of the guardians of the space. And we were in a sweat lodge with her, and there was snow on the ground. It was cold, and they were doing, because it was a special occasion, they were going to be bringing in extra stones, and they were going to make it extra hot, and there's going to be extra doors, which means that every time there's a door, they open up the skin, the animal skin that's over the door, and they bring in more stones. The stones represent, in some traditions, it's the grandmothers, in other traditions, it's the grandfathers. Yeah, so these are like the elders or the ancestors. So when they bring in the stones, it's like you're welcoming the grandfathers. Yeah, and welcome grandfathers, and they put the stones in, and they pour water with prayers and put herbs on the stone, so the aromas and the steam comes in, and it gets so hot. And it was around the third door, and I had experienced many sweat lodges, but I had never really had such a powerful experience. For me, it was a life-changing experience. It was even like one could call it a near-death experience of sorts. It was definitely an ego battle that was happening inside of me. I was right up next to the stones, and there were so many people in there that there was no room to move. And I was getting so hot, and I felt like I was going to pass out. And then because even though all the snow had melted and there was mud on the ground, I was kind of trying to put my face down to the earth to pull that cold air up, to cool me down. And as I was doing that and feeling like a child, I just felt so weak and almost desperate in that moment, like just a child, like somebody help me, But I was all inside of myself. And then this voice, this very strong, like elder voice, kind of came in. It was like a transmission, and it was sit up, breathe. And I was like, okay, all right. And I sat up, and I just breathed. I took 3 deep breaths in and out. And on the third exhale, it was like the whole room, the temperature just dropped 20 degrees. It was such that I felt a chill come through my body. But they had just brought in the stones for the 4th round. So it was actually getting hotter.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden my vision opened up. And I saw what to me was a spirit guide. That was my only reference point for who he was. It was a being that I started seeing at the age of 6 years old, who had come to me when I was struggling, or when I needed guidance or support, when I was sad, or many times when I was suicidal, he would show up. in my vision. And I hadn't seen him for 2 years at that point. Again, this is, what was this, 2012. And so when I saw him, I wept, and I was like, where have you been? I've really needed you. And, and he was just like, he never spoke with his mouth. It was always like a telepathic messaging.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, I'm here now. I've always been here. I love you. You're okay. And it's time to return home. That's what he said to me. And so in that moment, I knew exactly, it was 12 years after that experience in the jungle and 12 years after that experience on the beach. And I knew exactly what he meant, because for 12 years, literally on a, if not daily, a weekly basis, I was thinking about like, how do I know if I've learned what I'm supposed to learn? When do I get to return home and start this new, chapter in my life,
Mm-hmm.
right? And at that moment, I didn't know what I had learned. I had learned many things, but in that moment, I knew that it was time. And interestingly enough, the next morning, and this is, a bit of a, kind of a story that I didn't share a few pieces of it, but like I said, when I started seeing this being that was coming to me at 6 years old, he never spoke, but his presence was always affirming and calming and soothing for me. The next morning after this sweat lodge, after seeing him and not seeing him for 2 years prior, I looked in the mirror and I saw myself with my long hair, and it was longer than it is now, and it was pretty much right down to my belly button. And I was like, holy shit. And I just looked at myself, just gazed into my own eyes, and it was like, he's me. And then there was this transmission. It was like, yes, but not yet. First, you must return home. It was like,
Wow.
It was like, honestly, it was a pretty wild experience,
Yeah. Yeah. You've had a lot of wild experiences.
that caused me to question, what is this all? What is time?
Mm-hmm.
What is real?
Yeah.
What is a spirit guide? Because
Sure.
I mean, when I was 16, I started reading books about Native Americans and shamanism from indigenous society, and when I and about soul retrieval and things like that, just in the metaphysical section of the Barnes Noble bookstore, because I had a cafe job there, and I just always felt gravitated there, and I started reading about spirit guides. And then that was when I formulated the idea that maybe this guy that I've been seeing since I was a kid is a spirit guide. So that's what sent me down a road also of learning more about shamanism, sent me down the road of learning more about spirituality, learning more about meditation, learning more about shamanic journeying and these types of things. So,
Sure.
that return in 2013, that return to the Amazon was really the major start of that next chapter in my journey that led me to where I am now. Because when I went back to the jungle, I went to a shamanic conference where I encountered an elder female shaman who ended up 2 years later becoming my teacher. I also met my wife, who I encountered in an ayahuasca ceremony, and ayahuasca gave me a vision of my future son and showed me that she was his mother, and she was a girl that I didn't know, but who was in the ceremony space with us. And so that was a pretty wild experience. And I knew I was meant to have a son.
How do you break the ice on that one? Hey.
Whew. Honestly, it was pretty funny and beautiful. It was a full moon, and it was one of the most powerful ceremonies that night, just really transformative. And at the end of the ceremony, I invited her to go outside and just, bask in the full moon. And so we went outside and we sat down on a bench underneath the illumination of the moon. And we just sat there in silence for a while. And, you know, and of course, inside of my head, I'm like, how am I gonna tell her this one? You know, hey, nice to
By
meet
the
you.
way,
Did you
Yeah.
know that you're
Then
the
are you
mother of my
wondering if she
future?
had the same experience in her,
Of
spiritual
course, I
journey?
wondered that. Of course, I wondered
Yeah.
that. And so I said, hey, you know, like this might seem either incredibly synchronistic or it might seem completely crazy, and I'm okay
or the
with.
worst pickup line in history.
And I said, I'm okay with either, but I have to share something with you. And I shared with her my vision because it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
just a vision. When I saw my son and I looked to his right side facing me was this woman that was sitting next to me in ceremony. And I knew 100% that this is the spirit of my son. And then so I was like, that must be his mother. And then ayahuasca transmitted to me that is so, that she is his mother, and that we have shared many lifetimes together, and that we've been on this journey, and we've shared love, and we've had this kind of like karmic stuff that's been playing out, and we've come here to work that out, to resolve those karmic issues, those karmic conflicts, and to bring him into this world, and that he is going to be he's going to be the one that really helps us to integrate, to come together, and to resolve some of those issues. And so I shared this with her, and she said, she laughed, and she told me about her experience. And of course there was a lot of experiences that night, but the experience
Mm-hmm.
that related to me. And she said at one point in the ceremony, I was, I'm a musician. It's just, it doesn't matter if there's a bottle, or, a wood floor, or a chair, or a guitar, or a piano. It's like everything's a musical instrument, right? Everything's an opportunity to explore sound. And so I was, I guess, hunched over, like kind of tapping on the floor, like drumming on the floor, along with the shaman who was singing the songs for the
Wait,
ceremony.
is this really happening or in
This is
her
really
vision?
happening. No, this was
Okay.
really happening. And
Okay.
and she thought I looked like a monkey, you know. It isn't my Chinese zodiac, but and I am a little, I'm curious and playful and all that. And ayahuasca gave her a message, and the message was, you can't choose who you fall in love with.
Oh, wow.
And she was like, him?
A monkey?
So,
You know?
so did
Hilarious.
this prophecy get fulfilled, or what?
It did, interestingly enough, her father had, I had this love for the Amazon, and part of me going back was I had this idea in my head that I could go into the jungle, that I could buy land, and I could build a house for $10,000. I didn't have $10,000 at that time, but I had this idea that was possible. And so me going back was like also an investigation. Can I do that? And so her father had purchased a piece of land in the Amazon the year prior. Yeah. And they had gone there together to start a little project. She had been wanting to study the medicine, study the traditional medicines of the Amazon for many years. She had been working with ayahuasca for about 10 years at that time, and had a really strong inner calling. And she had gone to the jungle and had helped to heal herself of hypothyroidism and a number of different issues using the plant medicines under the guidance of a indigenous healer. And so she wanted to go and really learn. And her dad was like, I'm not sending my daughter alone to the Amazon. So
Right.
let's go down there together. At least see.
In swoops the long-haired gringo.
Yeah, right, exactly. And and he was like, I have some, like construction experience and that sort of thing, and we can build you a little house, and so at least I know that you have a safe place, and make sure you get connected with some of the local people and such. And so anyway, it all kind of lined up right? It was like she wanted to live there. He was only going to be there temporarily. I really wanted to be in the jungle. He really wanted somebody, who could look after her.
Mm-hmm.
He also knew if he was investing this money into building a house there, and it was only on his daughter to stay there and be the guardian, that probably after a few months she would get fed up with being alone in the jungle and leave. And he's like, and then my investments, like, who's going to be protecting my investment? And so when it all happened, and I met him, it was kind of synchronistic, really. On like day one, we went out to the land that he had bought, and it was just a jungle piece of land. There was no structures on it, and he just had this really open-hearted way about him. And I don't know if he was like that previously, or he was just like that with me. But like from day one, he was just like, "This is going to be your home," and like I just met his daughter, and he was like, this is going to be your home. You can create anything here. Anything you dream, you can create here. You want to build something, you can build something. You want to plant a garden, plant a garden. You want to start a business, start a business.
That's so cool.
And so that was the foundation. Just like this magical, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, maybe I don't need $10,000. Maybe I need less, right?
Yeah.
And so after having that, and I was in the first meeting to like build the first house on the land, which I was like, I'm not an architect, what do I know about this? But like he was inviting me into this beautiful co-creative process, recognizing that that his daughter and I had a beautiful connection that was, beyond the amount of time that we had spent together. At that point we had spent, 5 or 6 days together. And I needed to, I had a ticket out of the country, and I had planned, I basically said, okay, everything's aligned here. I'm going to go back to the US. I'm going to liquidate my things, which meant I needed to give up my entire music studio that I had, built over the course of about 15 years, playing with bands and everything, all the, kind of the most prized possessions, you know what I mean? That if anything were to represent who I was, it would have been the music studio, right? And so I had to get rid of it because I couldn't bring it to the jungle. Pretty much anything will grow mushrooms on it in the jungle if you bring it, even a computer.
Yeah.
And my plan was 6 months to go sell my things, make some money, go back. And she was basically like, no, you got 2 months. And I was like, oh shit. All right. Went back, and I made it happen. And I didn't go back with a fortune, but I went back with, a couple $1,000 and like just an incredible passion in my heart, just a knowingness that I was on the right path, that everything, like all of these dreams were just aligning at just a rapid rate. And it just felt like absolutely 100% the right thing to do. And so I did it, painted some houses, made some money, bust with my djembe on the street, to make some extra money, and anything I could do. Went back to the jungle and immediately started planting a food forest, food and medicine forest. And through that process, I started meeting all of these native healers and medicine people and farmers and all these people that were, their entire livelihoods were completely immersed in working the land. Not just working the land, but working with the land, right? Whether it's that they had ponds with fish, or they were growing ayahuasca, or they were woodsmen, so they were doing reforestation and harvesting wood for building and that sort of thing, not for exportation or that sort of thing, just for the local community. Where they were growing pineapples or yucca, platano, all these different things. And so I got to learn at a really rapid rate. I think in a way that a lot of foreigners don't get to learn when they go there, because they come as outsiders without having like an investment, without having like the land. So
Mhm.
they end up like looking very much like tourists, you know, to the local people. But one thing that was a great blessing was I was watching them, and I was out there just like they were, you know, with my shirt off and wearing rubber boots and a machete in hand, you know,
Mhm.
just sweating my ass off all day, working the land and, you know, planting trees and just hanging out with them and learning everything I could. And that really just sent me on that journey. I started encountering more shamans in the area, who became good friends of mine. Some of them were teaching me, and it was very informal, the teachings in the beginning. And then, but they set me on like doing these spiritual diets, going in isolation into the jungle to learn from the plants. You know, their traditional methodology to learn the shamanic arts. You know, in the jungle, like in alignment with their traditions. They kind of gave me a lot of that knowledge, so that I could learn on my own in the beginning. Because the biggest question that I had in the beginning was, I recognized, just like I recognized early on, that Western medicine wasn't the way for healing for me. I
Mhm.
also recognized that all humans, no matter who you are, right, there's a little bit of a taint of the ego, right? So
Sure.
I don't want, I'm not looking for a savior. I'm not looking for a guru. You know what I mean? I'm not looking for somebody to, you know, just like, eh, you know, because I know everybody has wisdom and everybody has medicine, and right, there's these other ulterior motives that sometimes can corrode or corrupt the clarity or the purity of the message. and
Absolutely. Yeah.
and the plants were continuously teaching me, and that they were teaching me that the plants are your teachers. You will learn some things from people, but right now, listen to the plants. And I wanted to know not just what these shamans were passing down generation after generation, but I wanted to know, how did the first shaman, how did they learn what
Mm.
they learned? How did they tap into this source and know that this plant is good for healing this? These were the mysteries that I was setting out to uncover.
Fascinating. What did you find out?
What did I find out? Um, Everything and nothing at all.
No, I can imagine
That's
that would
perfect.
be
Perfect answer.
that would be just almost impossible to answer, because it you know,
Oh man.
as you're moving through a journey like this, and you know, once you, where I might think you're an expert, you
Yeah.
know that you're a novice, or something along those lines. Because the more you know, it's like you said, you're a musician, but
Yeah.
the more you learn, the more you need to know, and
Need
you realize what you don't know.
or the more you learn, the more you need to unlearn,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's
Yeah.
true too.
right? And
Mhm.
you know, I mean, for me, it's been a really interesting journey. You know, I mean, I grew up in a religious family. You know, we went to church every Sunday. By the time I was around 11, there were many things that happened, you know, that caused me to kind of really have a strong kind of, I guess, you know, cynicism, I guess, around religion. There were some things
Mhm.
and the ways that it was projected to me, or the ways that it was taught to me, or some of the scriptures that came, that were kind of pressed upon me. Um, you know, I didn't resonate with. There were many teachings that I absolutely 100% did. You know, but I think it was those things that at that age, especially going into teenage years where we're more rebellious, we're more likely to rebel against the things we don't resonate with than to just say, oh, we're just going to push those things aside and we're just going to open ourselves up to the things we do. Right.
Well,
Mhm.
You understand?
plus when you're 12 or 13, you're immortal and you're never going to die, and you have and you don't really want to deal with things you don't want to hear, and you don't
What,
have to, because you're going to live forever.
well, I wouldn't say that I was in that category, because, you know, I was, especially by the time I was, you know, 13, I was fairly depressed, and suicidal thoughts were, you know, rolling through my mind on a regular basis. So the idea of death actually was quite familiar to me. It was something I thought about a lot. And I basically thought I wouldn't live past 28, you know? That was the, you know what I mean? I kind of had this idea, right? Which
Mhm.
created a bit of a midlife crisis at 28 when I when I
Yeah.
got there, and I was like, all right, I
What
guess
type of church? What type of church was it?
we were it was a Protestant church, you know. It
Okay.
was, yeah, it was a pretty you know, it definitely wasn't Catholic and huge, you know, on the judgment scale, you know.
Right. Right.
It was, you know, it was actually a nice community, but I think it was just more like the generational judgments, like those intergenerational kind of um, like, you know, judgments around, like when I was growing up, and I was, you know, I was kind of like a feminine boy, and so, but even though I was into girls, you know, there was like that impression that I was gay, and being gay wasn't okay, and you know, that sort of thing. And well, you know, and so like scriptures would be circled and given to me, you know, like basically comparing, you know, homosexuals to women and robbers. And I'll never, I don't remember what that, I was like, I've been searching for that scripture. Did I just interpret that, or is that somewhere?
No, it is. It is, but but that's a shame that you were treated that way.
it, yeah, sure. But you know, in the long run, it did make me stronger. You know,
Yeah.
100%, you know,
Yeah.
it did definitely make me stronger. But you know, the interesting thing about this whole journey is that, you know, we all, and I think this is one of the most important things around spirituality, is it's so important to be exposed, you know, um, to different perspectives on spirituality when we're younger, but not without or not with all the pressure to adopt any particular viewpoint, because it's
Mhm.
only through our own personal journeys that we really develop that relationship. And spirituality is all about relationship. If we're just
Yeah.
adopting ideas, it's not deep. We don't really have faith if we don't go through our trials and face, you know, the like the ultimate limit of the, you know, of like the subconscious mind or of the ego, right? And kind of
Mhm.
and seek something beyond that, you know. And it was actually through my experiences with plant medicines that led me to God, you know, great spirit. You know, for me, I think it's important to, for any person, to have a name that they use to reference this divine source,
Mhm.
rather than, you know, be the kind of person that is um, just using many names to appease others, you know, insecurities or kind of difficulties with, you know what I mean? Like if you say
Mhm.
God, somebody might be like makes them
Turned off
uncomfortable, right?
immediately. Yeah.
Yeah, turned off immediately. But at the
Mhm.
same time, what I've found in my life is when we don't use a word, and we say maybe 5 words for that same thing, that actually the potency of our own energy is diluted.
Mm.
You understand?
Yeah,
I
I get
do.
it.
Yeah. I use the word Jody, which
Jody?
is which is just basically God.
Okay.
Jody. Jody.
Okay,
Jody.
God. Okay.
And it makes people like stop and say, Jody, what the heck is that? And then it gives me a chance to explain
Explain. Yeah, yeah.
a little bit about my
Sure.
views on God, because
Yeah.
the idea of an old man sitting in the clouds ready
Right.
to judge us and send us to hell is not
Yeah,
my
yeah.
idea.
That's
So
it's not
it's,
mine either.
yeah, but a lot of times when you say God, that's immediately what they think.
Right.
So,
Well, I think that
Yeah.
depends on where they are.
well, yeah, well, a lot of
Yeah.
people are, you know,
I
that
mean,
wheel around.
I don't think that you could paint with that broad a brush.
Mm.
But so when you were having the, this is all coming full circle now. So
Yeah, yeah.
at least to me. So now you're a little bit older. Are you looking back at these beach moments when you know did your 3 days, and you know you got the voice in the head, and you know, hey, go home, go back to, you're not done here yet. Got to go
Yeah, yeah.
back to the States. I mean, as you were telling that story, and I just sat here listening because I mean, I'm thinking you really should write a book
Mhm.
Absolutely.
because
Yeah,
it's
it's coming. It's
I
definitely
normally don't sit here for 45, 50 minutes and not say anything.
coming.
I don't. But I was really captivated by your story, and I know you're just kind of getting rolling, and we haven't really even talked
Oh
about
yeah.
whatever you.
Oh, I know, man. And
Yeah.
that's just the beginning.
So do you
Yeah.
think that when you were in your 20s and 30s, when you were having these visions or these voices talk to you? Because I'm thinking that, okay, and this is before you even said you found God later in life, but that was like your guardian angel or Jesus or God talking to you to guide you to the path that you're on now, because that's kind of how I look at things. That things in my 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s have twisted me and the people that I have relationships with
Yeah.
now that I would have never met if uh this situation wouldn't have happened in my life, or I wouldn't have met this person, then I wouldn't have met this person. And then you because you had mentioned other things like that when you came back to the States, you started finding these other people that were like-minded and other
Yeah.
healers and stuff like this. And I'm thinking, okay, this is just all manifesting itself. I mean, this is, and it's happened more recently. Well, it's happened to me recently where uh, I really think that if you're in that state of mind and
Energy.
in that energy and state, you will bring that, you will attract that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Whether, and if you're, and obviously the opposite's true too. If you're in that
Yeah.
negative
Of
state,
course.
you will manifest that in your life.
Hmm.
But did you look at that now like that was maybe God or Jesus or your guardian angel steering you in this direction?
All of it. All of it. This is the thing from my, my experience and my perspective is that we can, you know, it's all part of the same, it's all part of the same source. We could
Mhm.
spend days, weeks, months, years, lifetimes breaking it down. This is this, that was that, but at the same time, we're not getting to the source of what it all is, right? This is, my relationship with, with this God consciousness, right? With this unified consciousness is that it permeates through all of life, which means that when we become realized or we become aware that that same divine consciousness runs through each of you and runs through every animal and plant and blade of grass and through the air and the water and the earth and the fire and all of the elements, yeah, it's like then every single being perceived as animate or inanimate is animate and operating and fueled by that same divine consciousness, which makes absolutely anything that we can connect with in an intimate way a doorway to that same unified consciousness, which makes even the smallest thing that one person might perceive as something that does not hold that consciousness turns that into something sacred to another and a doorway to those angelic realms and to those realms where we can connect with ancestors and guiding spirits and or that unified source, because all of these beings, they're all just doorways. You each are a unique doorway to that same divine consciousness, and it is expressed differently through each of you, right? How that is expressed, and it's expressed through your gifts, and what you're here to bring into the world, and that expression also evolves because your instrument is not the same when you're born as it is when you die. You too are going through this evolution because all of us, this is, the teachings of the medicine that I've learned through my apprenticeship with the plants, is that we all carry medicine. We are all part of this unified source, and that every single, it's like what I learned when I was dieting the master plants. Okay, and I can go into, if you like, what is a master plant? A master plant is a plant which holds a particularly high level of consciousness, such that it's able to transmit knowledge or teach. Yeah. And in my journey, dieting these plants, which means drinking them in isolation, eating a very strict diet, a lot of fasting in the forest without talking to anybody, and only participating in ayahuasca ceremonies with your teacher once a week or once every other week or sometimes twice a week. That's the only human interactions that there would be. And really developing an intimate relationship with the land and the water and the air and all of the elements, because we're just there. And when we have nobody to talk to, we're talking to the plants, we're talking to our soul, we're talking to God, we're talking to the water as we're bathing in the stream. And in that journey, in my first couple of years, because often shamanic teachers, they don't just unload they don't give you a curriculum. You don't show up like you're showing up to university and they say, we're going to learn this. Okay. You show up, you have questions. And what do they say? They say, go ask the plants. Okay. So this is, and of course the mind in the beginning is like, what? Ask the plants. Like, what do the plants know? You know what I mean? How do I even do that? How even think about that? Or how do I ask them in a way that they'll listen? And then how do I listen? And how do I know if what's coming back is just my mind or is a true transmission from this, from their intelligence? And in that journey, I started to see these plants as masters. Okay, and and because the indigenous people, they'll call them the plantas maestros, the master plants, or the master teachers. Yeah, and so I started to develop my own relationship with these master teachers. And I started to see that they knew more about me than I knew about myself in a lot of cases. They were able to show me things about myself and help me to repattern memories, and even dig deeper into my own ancestry and learn things about my great-great-grandparents that nobody in my family knew that had been transmitted to me. I started to learn all of these things, and as a result, I started to project upon them that they were, and it wasn't conscious, but I started to almost project like they were God. And I did for a period of time. Yet in my own training, I would find that each time I would communicate with them in that way, that there was something that felt, because part of this work that I was learning and training under was cultivating sensitivity to the subtle vibrations and frequency shifts. What is the frequency shift? When somebody says a word and then says the same word, but it carries a completely different feeling and vibration, it's because they're thinking something different, or their vibration is slightly different. They're going through something, they're not fully present with that vibration, right? So I was starting to notice these subtleties, and I started to recognize that when I was referring to them or putting them on a pedestal, that there was some dissonance there. There was some limitation there. And it really wasn't until I was like 4 or 5 years into my training, of a 10-year training, that it really made sense. And I was dieting alone in the forest a plant called the tree of light, or Noya Rao. And this is a plant recognized by the indigenous people as a tree which has a very, it's like has the spirit of an enlightened being. Okay, so very connected to the angelic realms, to the celestial realms. And the guidance that it brings through is all about how do we unify? How do we bring heaven to earth? These are the teachings of this plant. And in that dieta, I had an experience. I was alone in the house, and I decided, I was many years in, so I was drinking ayahuasca on my own. And I had an experience where the medicine opened up, was like almost like a vacuum to my ear, was sucking something out. And it was like, there was so much pressure and almost pain. And then it just like popped and opened up. And just outside of the house, where it was this, just screens around to the jungle, and there were these two angels that came and they were singing. And a part of this work in these journeys is like these songs are gifts. Curanderos, or the shamans in the jungle, they revere these songs as medicine. Yeah, and I've learned also that these songs are medicine, that these songs carry healing vibrations. They carry resonance of the master teacher plants, but also of the divine source. And these songs really help to heal my heart. And at the end of the song, I was like, how can I remember this? And so I went, and the medicine guided me, go get your guitar. Find one chord that is in alignment, that this is in the key of. And you strum it, and you, with your attention and your intention, you attach this vibration in this song to it, so that next time when you play that chord, you will immediately remember. So I did that.
What chord was it?
It was just a G chord. Interesting
Okay.
enough. Yeah, it was simple, right? Really simple.
Yeah.
And so then they gave me a practice. And the practice was to go and sit in front of a tree the next day, and to practice first with my eyes open, seeing the tree, but looking into the tree and seeing the light of God in the tree. Yeah. And then I would close my eyes and use my third eye, seeing and sensing the light of God within the tree. Yeah. And then I would practice putting my hands on the tree and feeling that divine presence. Yeah. So therefore, it was not just in the tree, but it was transmitted to my body. And then to practice looking at my body and seeing the light of God within me, and feeling and sensing with my eyes closed and my eyes open, and going through that practice, and then doing that practice with anything, doing that practice at the stream, doing that practice with a stone, doing that practice in front of a butterfly. And something in me transformed, and I realized that the little subtle shift thing, which was the next piece of my journey that I needed to learn, was that all of these master plants that I'd been working with, and these songs, they were only powerful as their access to the source. Yeah. And even though they're all connected to that source, that energy line is magnified with my attention and my intention. That when I put the focus on that connection rather than away from it, rather than just onto one little thing, right? Then it's magnified. Just the same way, if I focus on a spirit guide or I focus on an angel as an independent being, right? They're only as powerful as we, with our attention and our intention, connect them to that universal, infinite source. Does that make sense?
While you're telling that story, I just wanted to like raise my hands and say, "Testify, brother."
Testify. You're funny.
No, it's really, hey, I really enjoyed this last hour or so.
Oh,
and
for sure.
Can we commit you to another hour sometime soon?
I would love that. You don't want to keep going right now?
I really can. I have a real job.
Oh, real job.
I change shirts and come over here, do a podcast, and go back to work.
Okay, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it, because we're just getting in.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I still want to hear about the medicines you're working with and how it's helping people, and what you're actually doing now. One quick question before we go, though. I'm really interested in the ayahuasca experience as far as like side effects. Like, for example, when I do, like, I like to do high doses of psilocybin mushrooms because of different transmissions and different things that it gives me. But I find like a huge energy drain. Like I'm zapped, I feel like a day or two where my energy is just not there and kicking my butt, and it takes a while for
Yep.
it to restore. What about the ayahuasca? What's that like?
Well, first, I'm happy to go into that, but first, one of the things is that even the mushrooms can be hard on the liver, and so if you're, it's like you've got to look at what are you eating leading up, right? How are you kind of setting the tone for that experience, and then also how are you following it up? Like if you take certain herbs that support your liver function and detoxification, along with the mushrooms, you're going to have an easier time the next couple of days.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a suggestion. And when it comes to ayahuasca, similarly, in alignment with the traditions that I've trained, there's a protocol, and you see, in this kind of container that we're in now in the United States and the modern world, and people are experimenting with all different types of things, and there's lots of people leading ceremonies who haven't been traditionally trained, all over the place, right? There's some of these fundamentals that are often overlooked, such as the diet leading up, and who should be drinking how much. In these containers where somebody is untrained, they'll go around and they'll give every single person the same dose. But generally speaking, not everybody has the same sensitivity levels. Some people have certain, blocks and barriers within their physical bodies, their emotional bodies, and also their mental bodies, right? And so what we like to do is help to guide people through a dietary protocol that helps to detoxify and helps to get rid of some of those heavier toxins and also heavier energies, and then helps them to be a lot more sensitive. And then we do what's called a vomitivo, which is a purge. And this is a part of the traditional Amazonian medicine. Ayahuasca is a purgative medicine, and it helps us to release negative energies and also toxins from our body. But before we drink ayahuasca, and this is in alignment with the traditional Amazonian protocols, you do a vomitivo. And part of that is, again, like the morning of or the morning before, you drink a plant remedy specifically to help you to purge, because there's a lot of like emotional blocks and energetic blocks, right, that are there and can kind of block the medicine from really flowing freely in our field, and from our experience. So when we do that, and there's emotions already released without the visionary experience prior to, then you need less medicine when you come to the ceremony. And then we give a plant bath. You're bathing in flowers and specific plants for cleansing the energy field, but also all of those energies of those plants get absorbed into the pores in the body and offer the systems, that energetic and also that physical and spiritual protection and alignment, so that when we go into ceremony, a person is so much more prepared to open up and surrender. And we've already cultivated that trust, so that when that person gets there, there's not like, oh, I don't know if I trust this person next to me. I don't know if I trust this, this facilitator. I don't know if I trust myself to be able to navigate this experience. I don't know if I trust myself to get to the bathroom. These different things, right? When a person goes through this process and they're really cared for through this process and really embraced for what they need, which each unique person needs, then when we arrive at the ceremony, for many people, 1 cup is enough, for a lot of people. Sure. And then it ends up being maybe like 20% of people, if you follow this protocol, might go for a 2nd cup. And then it would be like 2% of people would like go for a 3rd cup. And it's like 50% of people only need a 1/2 cup. It's very different. And so we work with energies a lot with people to really be able to sense, and also with the messages from the plants. My wife and I, we have trained in this way to be able to listen to the plants, and they guide on they tell us things about people that come to ceremony that we don't know, that our minds don't know. We didn't learn from that relationship yet. So that's one big piece there.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great answer. So.
Mm.
All right, well, we do have to wrap up, but we'd love to have you back soon.
Yeah.
I love that.
Been amazing. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys.
Where are you at right now?
Right now I'm in Orlando. I'm just here for the weekend. I did an expo here. It was like a spiritual expo, selling my tinctures and remedies and promoting retreats and our microdosing program as well.
Well, if you
Very
have
cool.
if you have a car, you could zip 2.5 hours and come have dinner with us.
Where are you guys?
Port Charlotte,
Oh,
just south of Tampa, maybe
south of Tampa.
hour and a
Well,
half
south
south
of-
of Tampa.
Yeah,
Oh,
south
okay.
of Sarasota.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were just living in Sarasota. We moved to
Oh.
St. Augustine like 3 months ago.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Where in Sarasota were you?
Well, we were on Groveland Avenue. Trying to remember like what's the, I don't even know
Bee
what,
Ridge,
near
Fruitvale.
the Buddhist monastery.
Okay, we're like 45 miles from there.
Oh, okay.
Very cool.
Well,
Awesome.
being
Well, I'd love
you're-
to,
you're
next time I come
kinda
up there, I'd
local,
love to come see you guys.
That'd be
That'd be
awesome,
awesome.
man.
Would love that.
Yeah, heading back to Peru on Sunday for
To
a
Peru?
few weeks. Yeah, heading back to the
Okay.
jungle.
Very cool.
We'll reach out and maybe talk to you again after you get back, and we'll hear some more stories.
Beautiful. I'd love that.
We would too.
All right.
All
Take care. Thanks so
Thank you.
much. I appreciate your time.
So if you just listen to this podcast and you appreciate the content and the work that we're doing, we would love your support. Look in the comment section of this episode. Subscribe, rate us, comment. This gets our podcast in front of other listeners. And if you notice, we don't have advertisers. For the cost of a cup of coffee, you can help keep it this way. Become a supporter right now. We'd appreciate it. I'm Jim the Yogi.
I'm Rick the Beachman.
Meantime,
Peace.